Hello, welcome to the session of ASP.NET Programming for the Beginners. What is ASP.NET? ASP.NET is a server-side web application framework. We can use this framework to design, develop, and publish excellent websites on our own. Microsoft Visual Studio can be used to design and develop websites using ASP.NET framework. ASP.NET framework is derived from classic ASP and also they are the subset of .NET framework. .NET framework has numerous classes and libraries which we can use to build excellent web pages. Since ASP.NET is a web-based server-side framework, we'll be looking into what is meant by client and server. What is server? Server is some sort of database which provides information upon client request. Client is used to request information from the server and it formats and renders the information to the user. User will be using the HTTP URL request to the client. We'll be talking more in detail. So we can see an example of client and server interaction. Here we can see computer, tablet and smartphone. So here they play the role of client and web server here play the role of server. So to communicate between client and the server, we communicate through the internet. This is the URL format which the user used to communicate between the client and the server. And here the HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So this is a request response protocol in the client server interactions. Next we can see domain name. Domain name is an identification of your website or any services on the internet. So we can have our own domain name. There are various websites which helps us to achieve our own domain name. Path. So this is the path where our file is located. So we have to give exactly the correct directory where our files are located. Index.html. That is the first file which is being displayed on the browser when you provide your own URL. In ASP.NET, the first file which gets displayed is default.aspx. We can have our own file name as home page. That we'll be talking about that in later session. Now we will look into why do we need server-side web-based framework like ASP.NET. Why can't we use HTML to develop any web-based applications? So this is an example of a static web page. Static web page, it provides information without any change in the content based on the user request. So when the user requests information, the client requests the server and then it retrieves the information just stored in the web server and displays it to the user without any change. This is a simple example of how a web server processes a static web page. Initially, when the user requests a static web page, the information is sent in a URL format. User's file name will be included in the HTTP request as we have discussed earlier. Web server locates the file from the URL and then it responds through the HTTP response. So this is a very simple transaction that takes place in static web page. Now you can see an example of a dynamic web page. What is meant by dynamic web page? Dynamic web page is used to render web page that changes its content based on the user's request. So when a user requests based on their parameter, the content keeps changing. So there are various technologies available to develop dynamic web page like dynamic HTML, Flash, JavaScript, jQuery, Ajax. These are some of the languages which is used to develop a dynamic web page. This shows an example how a web server processes a dynamic web page. Here, when the user makes initial request, the request is sent in through HTTP request. I mean, his file name is included with the HTTP request, and IIS here plays the role of the web server. So IIS is Internet Information Server, and IIS looks into the extension of the file and passes the information to the appropriate application server. There can be different application server like VB.net, but we are using here ASP.net. And based on the application, if there is any data retrieval process, or if the web application is using backend database, then the information will be retrieved from the backend database server. Here, Microsoft SQL Server plays the role of the database server. Once all the information is retrieved, then it is sent back to the user through the application server. Here ASP.NET plays the role of application server, and then again back to the user. So this process of user making the request and then retrieving the information from the application server, then providing back to the user, and this is referred as round trip. So the term round trip is used to refer this process. To generate a dynamic web page, initially they were using client-side scripting languages. There are many client-side scripting languages. What is meant by client-side scripting languages? It is nothing but a language that programmatically controls a web page. HTML and CSS, they are used for the displaying and style. But if you want any action that need to be take place when user submits a form, then for such kind of program or such kind of examples, we need some more program that need to take place on the web page. So they were using different scripting languages, and one of the prominent scripting language is JavaScript. We can see some of the advantages of using JavaScript. So you might be wondering why I am talking about JavaScript. So in this section, we will look into JavaScript advantages, then disadvantages. From that, it will help us to identify like why we are using server-side web framework like ASP.NET. So that will give us more idea. So JavaScript can help us to create web page for interactive games, then dynamic modification, visual effects, then control of web browser in window. Not only this advantages, it also helps us in form validation. For example, you have created a form and you want to validate that whether the user had entered the necessary information like first name, last name, address. So how will you know that? So to check that, we can write a JavaScript program into the submit button. So we can check like whether the user had provided appropriate information. So for that validation purpose, JavaScript can be used. Also for so many other front-end dynamic activities, JavaScript is helpful, and also we know that jQuery, which is a JavaScript library, it is also very, very useful in creating visual effects and dynamic modification. Some of the disadvantages of JavaScript is it runs on the client system. So if we want to do any server-based programming, we cannot do with JavaScript, and above all, like it works only within the web browser, uh, because the JavaScript it will not work as expected on all browsers. There is some browser compatibility issues with JavaScript, and also it never allows file manipulation. And some other disadvantages are we cannot make any network connections or to access databases. Since to access database we need a server side scripting language. We cannot write queries on JavaScript. Also, it cannot directly interact with the web service, since it is a programmatic language which is written within a HTML page. What is meant by server-side scripting? A technology that processes a request by executing a script on a server. So for a more interactive website, we need ASP.NET. ASP.NET supports other languages like C#, Visual Basic, F#, and other .NET languages. So we will be using in our tutorial like using ASP.NET with C#. It doesn't mean that we don't need to use JavaScript. We need JavaScript like front-end validation and other client-side content generations. But for more intense calculations and long data storage or database-related web applications, then we need something more interactive server-side web framework like ASP.NET.